The academic institution has stifled innovation, but they've attracted the best brains.
The deranged institutional incentive structure where you're pursuing grants, you're competing with other labs over this grant money.
When people see institutional science, so they see universities or large pharma companies, actually it's not about those institutions. It's about the fringe thinkers, the weirdos, the people who are outliers, who don't get funding, who do not exist in these large institutions.
We try to be the first partner for entrepreneurs who are building things in deep tech. Boost VC, we've been doing it about 12 years. We've backed 500 plus startups at this point. We write 500K checks and we try to be the first partner. Like, we backed tons of things in this NFT space. When the market crashed, I sat there and I thought, hey, what is the next creator class? I was like, wait, science kind of makes sense. Like, we've never invested in science or bio. And I also thought, hey, if we can reinvent how academia works, like, this is huge.
We want a future of science that allows scientists to be fully self-sufficient. They can create a lab if they wish. They can explore ideas in whichever direction they want to with whatever methodology suits them. Our goal at Heterodox is to practically build new tools and infrastructure to support that. And so virtual lab platform is what we started with. How do we make science cool again? How do we get these theoretical physicists to the top of the social hierarchy again so that we can start traveling the galaxies a lot faster?
The fact that it takes 10 to 20 years to develop a drug and over $1 billion, I think it was before the FDA, it literally took 6 months to get approval.
My focus and what I keep saying is, like, I will become my own doctor. That is where this goes.
We have the ability to mold the future of science, radical, open, and decentralized.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Ryan Bethencourt. I'm your host at DeSci Pilled. Today, we have two incredible guests that I will let them introduce themselves. As a quick reminder, this is never medical advice nor financial advice as we cover crypto and science. All right, now off to get DeSci Pilled. Hey, Adam, thanks for joining. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Ryan.
You're welcome.
I'm really excited to be here with Alex and you. I am Adam Draper. I'm the founder and managing director of Boost VC, where we try to be the first partner for entrepreneurs who are building things in deep tech. I have been relatively obsessed with the emergence of the decentralization of science for about, I don't know, I released a 5-episode podcast on it like 2.5 years ago. So too early, maybe, but on time now, maybe, I don't know. You can never know timing until later. But who I am, I just love championing deep technologies. I love championing, actually, I shouldn't say deep technologies. I love championing the builders. I like championing the entrepreneurs who are actually building the technologies. And I'm so curious and want to learn how those things will go change the world. And I love, I'd say my favorite thing is the treasure hunt. And when I'm talking to a founder, trying to figure out what's their organic knowledge that they've earned over years, trying to find the little treasure that's the most original thought that they've sort of come up with through their crucible of earned hard work. And so that's me. I mean, Boost VC, we've been doing it about 12 years. We've backed 500 plus startups at this point. We write 500K checks and we try to be the first partner.
It's incredible. 500 different stories. And the treasure quest, we're going to come back to that later, right? I have a feeling I know where it comes from. So we're going to talk about that later. All right, Alex, could you tell us about yourself and Heterodox Labs?
Totally. So thanks for having me, Ryan. I'm happy to be here with you and Adam. I started a company called Heterodox Labs, and our goal is to develop new tools and infrastructure for scientific research that enable what we call a methodological plurality. And I could go into what that is later, but it all started kind of in the early stages of my tech career. I was working in tech, kind of out in Silicon Valley, building a fintech company and developing a computational skill set. And so that kind of led me down the line to discovering the world of science that I wasn't super particularly involved in for most of my life prior, but I kind of started self-learning, doing a lot of reading about the philosophy of science, and also just kind of like diving into the world of Carl Sagan and astronomy and astrophysics, which really captured me. And so this kind of actually ironically led me into wanting to go down a path towards academia. So I wanted to go into academia. I wanted to pursue something like a PhD in astrophysics. I started kind of like learning how I could position myself as someone that would be useful in a lab environment, taking my computational skill set, data science and machine learning, and maybe finding a way to be useful. And so in between that period of wanting to get involved in science, then actually getting involved in science, I got into a biology lab. So not astrophysics, but a start. And so I spent a summer working in a biology lab doing research in cellular mechanobiology. And I was kind of lending my data science and machine learning skills and learning a lot about just kind of like being in a lab, running wet lab experiments, doing analysis, presenting findings to faculty, reading literature. And it was honestly like a great experience. And so it kind of cemented my initial thesis of wanting to go into academia, at least for the moment. And then I got to a different university and started trying to get involved in the astrophysics program. I was like joining the physics club and all these things. And I started to get pretty disgruntled with the state of science broadly. And parallel to that, I was reading all of these super sort of polemic books about the philosophy of science, in particular, one called Against Method by Paul Feyerabend, which we could again go into in detail, but it started leading me to thinking about broader questions of like, why doesn't science seem to be making as much progress as it has in other historical periods? What are the gaps in science that we could perhaps fill with technology to enable more progress? And sort of in my disgruntlement, I decided to leave school and try to sort of develop my own tools and infrastructure to perform science rather than going the traditional route through labs at the universities. And that's what led me to ultimately starting Heterodox.
Awesome. And Heterodox provides a platform for people doing distributed science basically themselves, right? Is that?
Yeah, that's essentially the starting point. So we started with a very simple framework for citizen science. You create a virtual lab around a research topic or a science category. We try to keep it very open-ended and not super rigid in terms of things being super domain specific, to allow for all of these fringe areas of science to perhaps be explored. And you create your virtual lab and you start performing your end-to-end scientific process within this virtual lab environment. And so this enables probably more comprehensive publishing, which I think is a second order effect of virtualizing the scientific process. It also allows full scientific process tracking. So you're kind of like actually able to wrangle the data that encapsulates what you're doing in a lab on a daily basis. And so that's kind of a big part of it. But fundamentally, it is kind of like trying to take science being done, virtualize it so that we can extrapolate and do more performant things with the data that you can capture.
And just to kind of give a quick example. So for someone that's like, what's the weirdest, most interesting virtual lab that you have on the platform? What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I would say probably something in the direction of like UFOs. There's like a spacecraft technology one. There's people studying like medicinal herbs. It spans the whole gamut of different areas of science. We're still very early stage, and so we launched our beta. People started creating their labs. We're launching a new version here soon. But yeah, you could imagine all of the weird things that people might explore given the tools and infrastructure to do so.
Amazing. So thank you, Alex. That's a great overview. So I wanted to go back to Adam. So I wanted to really dive a little bit into Adam's background because, Adam, you talked about quests. And I have a feeling, correct me if I'm wrong, one of your early quests, and by the way, one of our shared passions, comics, I would love to hear a little bit more about your quest where you eventually ended up with Skybound. I won't even say the name of the comic, so you can tell us that journey, because that sounds fascinating.
First off, I appreciate any situation where I get to talk about comic books. So I should probably say thank you for coming here to what is now called DeSci Comic Books.
And we're gonna loop it in because I think it's connected.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm gonna tell my part. You get to try to loop this in. I'm a deal. In one way, I'm a deal junkie. Like that's what venture capital is. I get to help people by promising capital and work and advice, and on the other side, they're promising to work hard, build value, solve the problem that they said that they were going to solve. Building promises and delivering on promises is my definition of business. And every once in a while, you come up with a really hilarious deal that you want to solve for yourself. And my brother had come up with one for a very specific set of cards. And I was like, I wonder what my what's like my weird collector thing, because I've been reading comics my whole life. I've been collecting sports cards, comic books, and I settled on this idea where I was like, what's my wife once asked me what would I do if I had all the money in the world, and I was like, probably buy an expensive comic book. And I was like, but my favorite comic book's not that expensive. And so it's a comic called Invincible. And now there's a Amazon Prime series on it. And so I bought one, and I was at a Comic-Con, and I negotiated a price. And I was like, okay, I have one of these comic books. And then I was like, well, how many were there in the first print? And so there were 10,000 in the first print, but graded, there were only like, it was something like, so 10,000 is not that many to begin with in a first print, very relatively limited edition, even if you just have one. But I believe there ended up being about, what was it? I own that many, and that's about, 1,400 comic books that were graded 9.0 and above, which is like the grading system. And so I just started to buy them. And I bought one, bought another. And in order to corner the market on a comic book, you have to start to call people. You have to be like, hey, so I've called every comic book store in California, basically. I hired someone at one point just to do dial for dollars for every single comic book, like across the country. That it only netted like one new comic book. And then but I ended up calling someone who worked at this company that published it, which was called Skybound. And it turns out Skybound is owned by started by sort of three partners. One focused on video games, one focused on the creator named Robert Kirkman, who's very famous for creating The Walking Dead and Invincible. And then one named DA, who's like an incredible business person in sort of the Hollywood intellectual property world. And so I started to like talk to this guy, and this guy just had a great time at this company, working at this company. And he had a big block of Invincible #1s, and I made an offer, and he sold it to me. And I was like, that saved me so much time. I got like 30 all at once. And then I was like, wait, are you guys fundraising? And he said, you would have to talk to John. Turns out I know John. I've known John for a long time. And this is sort of like where your curiosities cross paths. And John, it turns out, was John Goldman, who was in VR, and that's where I met him. But it turns out he was also a partner on Skybound. And so I talked to him.
I
and
remember
like,
when you were super big on VR. I remember that journey too. You were super big on the VR.
Still
world, right?
am.
Still are.
Yeah. Might have been a little early, but we're persistent, if nothing else. And so that's so funny. Ryan, you and I have followed each other. Like this is like the whole crazy thing. I'm having my
wild
world's
journey.
Mess. Yeah. And so, but what ends up happening is you start to talk to people, and I was just trying to buy as many of this one comic, but I was like, wait, is this company
you were on your quest. You were on a quest to buy these comics, right? Yeah.
And when a door opens, you just ask a couple extra questions, and you find out more information. And I ended up being like, hey, are you fundraising? Talk to John. John was great. I've always admired John. So I'm like, yeah, if you were a part of this seems like a legitimate institution. And so they said, we're not fundraising, but I guess we should, because a couple people have asked. This is sort of what price we would raise money at. I was like, great. I didn't even negotiate. I was just like, great. But I have to be on the board. And so I'm only on one board. And it's a comic book company. It has nothing to do with, it's not deep technology, but it inspires deep technology. And Invincible is the #1 show on Amazon Prime whenever it's released. I think it's the #1 that helps Amazon Prime get new accounts. It's like the #1 people sign up for Amazon Prime to watch the show. And so, that's been fun. They also own the rights to The Walking Dead. It's a good business. It's a great business. And I'm just lucky to be able to talk about comic books once, twice a year. Actually, I talk about them on whenever anyone gives me the shot to. But that's how I ended up on the board. And so
it was your quest. It was
and
this
at
quest,
the end of
right?
my quest, it was like 2 months ago, I was just sitting there and I was about to buy another Invincible #1. And I've been cornering the market on this. Sorry, I made it sound very quick. It was a 4 or 5 year journey. Like, it wasn't a short thing. And I was about to click buy and I was just looking at it and I was like, you know what? I started just buying one comic book and now I'm on the board of the company that creates this comic book. And I've met so many amazing people. I think it's time I sort of hang up this quest. I feel like I succeeded. I sort of had this moment of calm where I was like, I succeeded in this quest. Time to find a new quest. And I haven't decided what my next one is, but I think that's also what venture is. It's like, you're on a quest. I'm trying to get to the end of VR. I'm trying to get to the end of DeSci. I'm trying to figure out like who I get to meet along the way. And I do sort of the same process for any of my silly quests, right? You build a community, you talk to people, you invest in things, you try to figure out what this is all about and if it's good for the world.
Yeah, and I think, what's interesting, a lot of people don't know this, is that you came across comics when you were a child, right? It was your dad that basically told you to go into the comic book store, get as many comics as you could get, and that's kind of what started that quest from childhood, right?
Dude, the most crazy, yes. So I went into, there used to be a comic book store. I forget what the original name was, but I knew it as Home Field Advantage in Menlo Park. And they were going out, the original store was going out of business. Home Field lived on later, but the original store was going out of business. And we walked in and my dad negotiated this deal where he was like 5-cent comic books. Actually, it was pretty much a clearance sale, but I think it was 10-cent comics. And my dad was like, can I do 5? And he said, if you can carry it out of the store to the house, I will buy it for you. And for me, I was just like, okay. I was 6, 7 years old. I was piling it into these short boxes. And
it sounds incredible, right? Like that, honestly, for those of us that love comics or any collectible, to be told, grab as much as you want, as long as you can carry it, it's like better than Christmas, right?
Also an incredible line, and I've used it on my kids every once in a while, where it's like something that it's not that expensive and like I can afford it. It's an incredible line and it inspired me. I ended up with 150, 200 comics and I have read every single one of those thousands of times and I still have them all. And so, some of them might have like burned over the course of time, but like I still have them all. And I really was, I won't get too deep on my comic book like obsession, but it inspired my ability to see these worlds that founders talk about. They're like, this is what my world is. This is what I'm trying to do. This problem is the most important one to solve. Comic books are just an expansion of the imagination, and I've just always had that. And so it's been great.
By the way, Adam, and I think that's what's powerful, right? Like, I would almost say, like, it kind of makes sense when you look back to those formative early days for you, all those comic books, those imaginary worlds, many of them filled with science fiction, right?
Yeah.
Which led you to start Boost, right? And start on this journey. Because I think, one of the most interesting things really around Boost has been, from the start, you've been backing people and founders with these crazy quests and these crazy ideas, right?
And anytime we got too fixated on one type of founder, we felt like we were doing the wrong thing. So like we went all in on Bitcoin and Bitcoin was amazing. Like we loved it, but there were all these great VR founders. And so we'd be like, oh, well, maybe we should do a couple of those. And like, then we'd learn about VR. And now it's pretty instinctual for us to like deploy into an ecosystem, whether it's DeSci. We went hard in aerospace and defense. Like there are these ecosystems of these just, you can kind of sense that there's change in the world occurring. It's kind of like the friction of like a fracture in the universe that's about to happen. And we love we're magnetically drawn to those groups of people.
Which is cool, right? Because you also back that. So you're willing to go in very, very early from the start and give founders, honestly, quite a lot of money, right? What is it, $500K check for your sci-fi founders. And then for your DeSci test ideas, it's 50K, right? That's
Yeah.
just something recently you started with your, and I think, you've got the shirt, right? So short academia, long DeSci, right? So tell us about that.
Yeah, so how we look at venture at Boost VC is like, we want to be the first partner. I think that that's, in essence, the most valuable thing that we could be, as long as we want them to have a good relationship with the venture capitalists, understand what the partnership really is. We do a high velocity, so we do a lot of partner, and you can immediately, I feel we're a really great gateway into Silicon Valley if you're from out of town, if you're from an industry that isn't usually sort of like gatewayed into Silicon Valley. Like, we're a pretty good segue into that. We host a demo day that's actually coming up next week, where we partner with other funds and we host companies digitally where you can just connect with the companies and invest. It's like a pretty amazing product. And sorry, I forget what the actual question was.
Yeah, so you've been backing like science fiction or deep tech founders for a while, right? And then including, by the way, just worth noting, because this is crypto and science. You also was it an angel check to Coinbase as well?
Yeah, so I was the first investor in Coinbase, or debatable. It could have been me or Gary.
But by the way, all the successes, everyone was always first. This is one thing I've noticed.
I'm going to take it.
No one
has vocalized debate, so I'm just going to keep taking it.
Yeah, take it. Yeah. So you were the first investor in Coinbase.
Yes.
And so that must have felt, what was the feeling of that? Was that just like this guy with this crazy idea around Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I think I was very lucky because I met Brian Armstrong, and he pitched me a vision of how the world was going to work. He didn't even pitch me Bitcoin. He goes, at some point the world's going to be on one financial infrastructure. We were out to coffee. And I was like, well, why isn't it? And he was like, and at the end of it, he said, Bitcoin is the way in which we can get there right now. This is the best answer. But he wasn't stubborn on Bitcoin. He was just saying, like, this is the best answer on the day to do this. And so what was it like? Dude, it was just like meeting any great founder. He's telling me this vision. I'm drinking my hot chocolate with whipped cream. We're at I always like to give.
You're seeing his vision in your mind's eye already, right? It's building out.
Oh, and the way I analogized it immediately was, I could text anyone in the world for free, essentially. Why can't I send money for free? And like, that was the vision. Now, I make it sound like I made the decision immediately. He had to follow up with me a couple times. Like, I was diligencing, and at one point I was like, hey, can you just send me some people to talk to about this Bitcoin thing? And the reason I made the bet were two things. Everyone I met in Bitcoin was so inspired by Bitcoin. It was an inspired ecosystem. And not one person brought up the fact that, like, the majority of people use it to buy drugs. They all pictured this idea of a global ecosystem. And I was like, so I wasn't influenced by this idea of drug buying. Like, most people were like, no, drugs, guns, whatever. I was just like, wait, all these people are just talking about like an internet wallet. Like, what? I don't know why you're talking about, drugs and guns and stuff. The second thing was, I had this Economist magazine next to my toilet that I read thousands of times. Everyone has that stack of magazines. Or comic books. It's half comic books. The funniest part is, like, this story could go a completely different way.
We could go back into comics.
Yeah, you could go back into comic books.
And by the way, you're talking about Silk Road too. So for those that don't remember, because there are probably some younger watchers too, Silk Road was the original reason people started using Bitcoin to buy primarily drugs. By the way, I tried and I couldn't figure it out. So I wanted to buy some mushrooms, couldn't figure it out.
I had friends who actually used it early and had, hundreds of Bitcoin, but they were just trying to, buy some drugs online. And sorry, I don't affiliate with people who would have done that.
Of course not. Although Ross is free, though, by the way. That was
Ross is free. So that's
Ross
where all
free.
he was a big confiscated part of the US amount
Bitcoin
of Bitcoin
reserve.
that the US currently has in the reserve.
Thank you, Ross, for the Bitcoin reserve. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, and so I had this thing, and then I had this Economist magazine. I'd read it a lot, and then this one day when I'm making the decision on Brian, like, an article presents itself and it says Bitcoin bubble burst. And I read the whole thing and I'm like, it says Bitcoin burst and the price is now $3. And from 30, it was up at 30. Now it's $3 per Bitcoin. And on that day, I looked at the price and it was like $10 per Bitcoin. And I was like, wait, it's not dead. Like, why are they saying it's dead? It's not dead. And so I looked at it and I called Brian at literally that moment, I think. So unfortunately, I was on the toilet while I accepted the Coinbase investment. And I call him and I'm like, I'm in. And I remember him saying, for how much? And I picked the lower of the numbers and I should have picked the higher, right? Like that is how it always works. And but I was in and he was one of my first 4 investments as an investor. So also just naiveness probably played into my success there, right? But Brian was the meme of like a quality founder going into this, like I say, rational people doing irrational things. And he led me to fall in love with Bitcoin. I think it's the most, no matter what, it will be, financially, whatever, the most defining investment of my career. And the reason is that it led me to essentially start Boost, which led me to Bitcoin, which led me to DeSci. Like, I mean, like you can linearly paint a path of Coinbase leading to all that. And so I'm so thankful for Brian to, like, as a founder who sort of enabled this interest and this curiosity in me. So
amazing. So I mean, that all interlinks, and then you started to invest in, and by the way, we're all thankful to Brian. So thank you, Brian, for making. We've all used Coinbase. We love Coinbase. We love what he's built, and we also love what he's doing with longevity too, because he likes science too. So
he does.
He does. So kind of linking that all in with DeSci. So you were early investing. You invested in a bunch of DeSci companies. Tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll flip over to Alex after a bit. Just
yeah. No, I got to DeSci 2 ways, and I'll describe both of them really quickly. But the one of the ways was crypto's actually been adopted on a very linear path, if you think about it as creator adoption. So it started with the idealist or anarchist. So they were buying drugs, guns, like that was the Silk Road age. And then it was adopted by computer scientists. And computer scientists like Brian, but other people, there were tons in this phase that were all like, hey, this is really interesting. Like, they weren't really thinking about the money. They were thinking about what it evoked, like how does it impact the world? And that's why people were buying, like, pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin or whatever. It was because they weren't thinking of it as money. They were just like, let's do this thing. Like, oh, how cool is it? It wasn't US dollars and I bought a pizza, like, oh, that's wild. And dude, I bought pizza with Bitcoin and I've regretted it also. I'm just like, everyone regrets it. Stop buying pizza with Bitcoin. I'll do it next year. And so there was the computer scientists, and then there was the finance. I don't want to say finance bro, but it was kind of this phase where people who understood money, most of the people were failing out of finance into crypto. And now it's the opposite, as people feel out of crypto into finance. It's funny, change, flippening. I always look for flippenings. That was a flippening that happened. And then the next phase was entertainment, and it was NFTs, the rise of, CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, like this phase where Beeple was actually the guy who showed everyone that there was this new business model for digital art. And he doesn't get enough credit. He gets credit. I don't think he gets enough credit, because right when that happened, I got called by every artist that's ever heard of venture capital. And they all were like, hey, I'm a better artist than Beeple. I don't know. How do I do this? And so we backed Nifty Gateway that got acquired by Gemini, and we backed tons of things in this NFT space. But when the market crashed, I sat there and I thought, hey, what is the next creator class? Because I was thinking, hey, this is actually way more linear than the thing.
By the way, I love the term you're using, the next creator class. I think that's a very powerful way of thinking about crypto.
Yeah, no, completely. And it actually really works well whenever there's a new creator class that needs a new business model. And like, that's sort of that has been conditioned not to want it. And like, that's sort of music would be a big one. They started to, but they didn't get there hard. And so I was like, wait, science kind of makes sense. And then separately on the same trajectory, what we started to see at Boost is sort of this great net of where is there a rebellion from the institution. So it's like it's like we get the craziest stuff. Like if it's an Iron Man suit or a city that's building itself away from the countries or whatever, like we get the craziest things that are awesome. Like it's just the greatest brand I've ever thought to build, and it's amazing. And we seem to be getting just a lot. The thing that got really cold in during the market crash in the last 2 years was biology. And so we started to see these fantastic scientists who had already left academia, who were unable to fundraise, incredibly talented, understood what they needed to do, and were creating breakthroughs. So in 2021, the vaccines, all those companies got way too much money, and then it collapsed. And so all these bio VCs stopped investing, unless it was internally. And so suddenly there's this moment where it made sense for these startups to reach out to us when we weren't classically a bio fund. Like we've never invested in science or bio. And so suddenly I'm seeing these two things collide in my fund where I've sort of like come to terms with the fact that I think science is an interesting creator class that's been conditioned not to want money. And these scientists were already rebelling from the like institution to start companies. And so I was like, well, maybe there's something here. And then, I talked to enough people. I run into Patrick Joyce from Research Hub, who's partnered with Brian Armstrong. So Brian Armstrong's coming back. And I'm like, it actually didn't come from Brian. It was the opposite direction, because I had been going hard into DeSci. And then it was just the volume of amazing people, HairDAO, it was just all these, it reminded me a lot of the beginning of Bitcoin, where there's these great people, idealists, experimenting with DAOs, experimenting with like new products, like Alex's situation with the new ways in which to do labs and research. And I also thought, hey, if we can reinvent how academia works, like this is huge. Like this is not a 10% step function like goal. This is a 20x, 100x, 1000x. And it feels like we're starting to make headway. It's early. I'm not like, we're early. Yeah. If anyone's wondering, like I can sense when things are early and when they're on time. Actually, I can't sense on time. I wish. I can sense when they're early. They're early right now.
Yeah, we're super early. We HairDAO, great team. We talked to them. One of the next pods to release is going to be really interesting. Focus on product development, so making real products and services for DeSci companies. It's going to be a great episode. Should come before. And there's an incredible energy. I think you're right. There's this incredible energy around creating, building. It's bubbling up. It's not quite there, and I think that's what we're doing. We're exploring this frontier. And I think that, moving into investing in that space, I think this is where I came across Alex. Alex put together with Heterodox Labs, put together this incredible, actually, we'll put it in the notes. We'll put a link to his incredible video. One of my friends, Riva, sent me his video and said, hey, check this video out. It's really cool. Science is anarchy, right? And so, Alex, tell us about that, because it was just like what you're doing in your mission is so different.
Yeah, so I appreciate the compliments on the video. Certainly a lot of work got put into it, and I kind of kept it away from the world for a little bit. We actually made it back in September, and then I think Riva just like randomly discovered it on the Instagram where it was buried, and she was like, you got to tweet this. And then a bunch of people started discovering it and got a lot of great feedback. So kind of wanting to continue to do more of those things. But the video, sort of was this theme of epistemological anarchy, which I know we talk a lot about in science, kind of like we need science to change, we need science to sort of improve or to be something different than sort of what academia has been for the last 20 to 50 years or so. But interestingly, I think what we really want science to do is revert to its natural state. I think sort of post-World War II, we saw sort of mutation of science into this sort of complex, unrecognizable state where institutions became the primary funding source for science, and it created this deranged institutional incentives structure. And that's kind of led to this stagnation and incrementalism that we see in science. And so really the idea of epistemological anarchy was introduced by Paul Feyerabend in the book that I mentioned earlier called Against Method, where it kind of says if you look at the history of scientific progress, these like very specific moments, he uses the case of Galileo as an example, you'll find sort of examples of progress being achieved not through rigorous methodology or sort of very particular scientific practices. It's often achieved by these counterinductive figures, sort of going against an established paradigm that is actually a lot more rigorous in nature than the one that they're bringing forth themselves. So another example is kind of like Newton, who was this, probably the greatest scientist of all time. Most people probably agree with that, but he was an alchemist in his spare time, and he had all of these weird religious interests. And then in his spare time, he would, solve calculus or develop calculus and create the laws of gravity and so forth. And so you have these examples of
you mentioned gravity. Adam's gonna get excited about gravity. He's very into gravity as a force.
You've listened to me too much, Ryan.
I know many things.
Yeah, fantastic.
So we'll go into gravity later. I don't want to stop your flow, Alex. We'll come back to gravity. Newton, gravity, fundamental forces. How do we understand them? What are they, right? Like all of those things. Yeah.
Sure. I'm happy to go into it.
Yeah.
But all of that to kind of say, really science in its fundamental natural state, when it's functioning properly and making progress, is actually anarchic in nature. It is methodologically plural. Folks from, regardless of sort of institutional affiliation and background, are exploring really weird ideas. They're very counter to our current interpretations and models. And when the conditions are such that folks like that can emerge, you see these moments of scientific progress. And so we did this video trying to sort of put forth this narrative that science is actually an anarchic enterprise. And that is what a sort of model of science functioning properly and making progress looks like. And we want to continue to do videos like this.
And Alex, I think for a lot of people, they're like, oh, like when people see institutional science, so they see universities or large pharma companies, or you name the innovator. Your video really reopened my eyes to really understanding, actually, it's not about those institutions. It's about the fringe thinkers, the weirdos, the people who are outliers, right? Who don't get funding, who do not exist in these large institutions. In fact, the institutions kind of kill the innovation that can come from science, right? Is that kind of the right way to really think about it?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. Like I was kind of getting at earlier, we had this post-World War II institutionalization of science that kind of coincided with this other book that was published, which is kind of like the opposite end of the spectrum from Against Method, which is called The Logic of Scientific Discovery. And what you had was this sort of regime of epistemology called logical positivism, where you start to demarcate things that are scientific versus those that are pseudoscientific. And this coincides with kind of like the deranged institutional incentive structure, where you're pursuing grants, you're competing with other labs over this grant money, and so you sort of have to use this falsificationist paradigm of saying my stuff is more scientific than your stuff, and this systematically excludes all of these weird fringe areas of science, these odd thinkers, the Remunijons of the world that are kind of like out in the middle of nowhere, coming up with proofs and sending them to professors. We don't really have that anymore. And I think it's a direct result of this very rigid institutional structure of science that exists and is propelled by government bodies, large funding bodies like the NSF and the NIH that sort of force science into sort of having to conform to a grant-based incentive structure.
Yeah. It doesn't leave space for the strange, for the weird, for the unexplained, for the fringe thinkers. So yeah, that video really, I think after seeing that, DeSci for me really kind of pulled together. You and Adam actually share that thesis that, the too big to fail. One of the biggest problems with academia and with large institutions is their sheer scale and size. It takes out the creativity and the strangeness. And so today you're building this kind of virtual lab to enable people to basically build their own virtual labs, virtual data, distributed data, open source publication, right? And I'm assuming you'll be pulling in other things like AI, community building, things like that.
Definitely. So we look at the problem of science being this reflexive problem between institutional incentives and methodological rigidity. So we're like, how do we enable a methodological plurality? Because we think that is a state of science that is more conducive to progress. How do we create tools and infrastructure that allow people to sort of do science in a different way than it's being done currently or previously? And so the starting point is sort of looking at open source approaches, sort of like the contribution network model of science rather than sort of the lab contribution hierarchy model. And then you start to build in AI augmentation. You start to sort of look at domain exploration and sort of embracing the fringe, all of these different weird areas of science. And then, as you mentioned, new forms of publishing. I think this is pretty critical for the communication of science. So something that we're working on is a structure called embedded publishing. So rather than just sort of publishing text document-like material that are highly abstract into paywalled journals, you produce an embedded document which has your sort of research summary as you normally would write it up, but you're able to directly embed your data, your models, your code, your materials in line with the publication so that you're able to more concretely communicate the scientific process from an end-to-end standpoint rather than this highly abstract summarized standpoint.
Amazing. So, and kind of just to loop it in, because I know, gravity is near and dear to Adam's heart, but you're into astrophysics too, right? And so I remember when we first talked, you're like, no, this isn't about really wet labs and biology. This is the physical sciences. This is a different focus, right? And so that really caught my attention with what you were doing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis, a lot of attention and direction towards science, decentralized science. A lot of it goes towards the biosciences, bioinformatics, because a lot of it's really just data, and you can just kind of analyze the data. You can run some analysis on cells, and you have images, and then you run some image analysis algorithms, and you have your CSV, and you can visualize it and do stuff like that. But something like theoretical physics is a pretty difficult problem to solve in terms of virtualizing the scientific process. And I think physics is probably the biggest area of science that is seeing the most trouble. We had this golden era of physics in the early half of the 20th century with relativity and quantum mechanics, and we haven't seen much progress in physics, probably more so than any other science of recent years since the 70s. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do we improve physics, theoretical physics in particular.
But they love talking about that string theory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a lot of people like to talk about the string theory, and hopefully, once we inspire this philosophy of epistemological anarchy, we can get all these new regimes of theoretical physics breaking open, and support researchers that want to explore them. Because I think there are a lot of really talented people in these theoretical physics labs, but they kind of get wrapped up into the string theories or all of these other areas of science that are getting more attention, and we want to create mechanisms to enable all of these physicists to explore.
I mean, it sounds like you want science to be punk rock, right?
I think Riva said it when I was with her last week, and we want to make science cool. We want to engage the culture. We want to sort of reinvigorate the culture of science. And I read the Great Stagnation by Tyler Cowen. He's one of my favorite authors, a famous economist, and he said that perhaps one of the greatest things that we can do for innovation growth is to increase the social status of scientists. And so I think that's kind of maybe something that we want to look at, like how do we make science cool again? How do we get these theoretical physicists to the top of the social hierarchy again, and get them working on these fringe areas of physics so that we can start traveling the galaxies a lot faster?
I think we're all down for that, right, Adam?
Rebrand science. It sounds like we're rebranding. We're in it's like leverage buyouts had to change their name because they were firing too many people into private equity. We're doing a full science rebrand.
Make science cool again, right?
We're calling it entrepreneurship. Genuinely, like we are rebranding the same concept, right? Like iterative thinking, solving hard problems. It's
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or like kind of what I was saying, a reversion of the brand back to the brand that was working, the natural state that we saw in the early half of the 20th century. We call it reditus ad naturam. It's a return to nature. And that's kind of like what we hope the future of science is. It's more natural, it's more open, more free, and decentralized.
Yeah, but that's harder to put on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so like science is punk rock would be a good T-shirt. I think in
I
terms
like
of
that.
T-shirt.
Science is punk rock.
Yeah.
I think that might be the next T-shirt.
So Adam, you have to check out. I'll have to send you some of the shirts we did. We did 90s rap tee styles of scientists. So we did one for Galileo, and we did one for Paul Feyerabend.
Brilliant. Love that.
So you know,
that's
Outlaws.
Great. Yeah. Dude, science is punk rock on top of like Galileo would be like chef's kiss.
I love the creativity of this. So guys, as we're kind of coming up to time, would love to get your perspectives on where we're going, like where we are today and where we're going. Because I mean, maybe Adam, just to start with you, like you've seen this before, right? You have pattern recognition. You've seen these like nascent industries. And
no,
these,
I've been to the future.
Crypto.
I've literally seen this.
Yeah, you literally seen it. I know you were just recently in Prospera, right? So you literally saw the future, right?
Dude, I have a blog post that's like primed. I haven't finished on Prospera. Well, I'll talk about that some other time.
Prospera, for those that don't know, Prospera is, I think, the world's first autonomous zone, right? Is that accurate?
They're essentially called freedom zones, but it's special economic zones.
Yeah.
And my like they sound, I don't know how they sound, but they sound different than they are. It's awesome. Like my quick summary is, I highly recommend. It is like walking into the future and being like, I'm a little uncomfortable, but it's amazing, and this is definitely how the future is going to be. And like it's just, I don't know how to describe it better than that. It's probably the same way that like a banker felt about Bitcoin, like that. It's like that big of a societal cultural shift. It's fantastic.
For someone that works in drug development, the idea of not having the FDA blocking progress is one of the most exciting ideas. That, you know, the fact that it takes 10 to 20 years to develop a drug and over $1 billion, it should, you know, I think it was before the FDA, it literally took 6 months to get approval, right?
Wild.
Like, just nuts when you think about how many people have missed out on therapies that could have saved their lives or improved their lives or made them better, right? So we're going to be talking about peptides too soon, by the way. There's a lot of really cool peptides we can explore.
Dude, okay, a whole other thing. We'll talk about peptides, a different thing, because like I'm going places and people. I was at this party last week, and two younger people, I'm old now, were like arguing about which peptides they do, and I was just like, where am I? But I gotta break down for my team. I'm just old now, so it's just a whole thing.
Peptides is the next thing, right?
It's definitely a thing.
It's the thing, yeah.
But you're asking where this is going.
Yeah. Where's this going? Where are we?
I think you, I think I are all sort of on this similar mission of just like unlocking brain power to solve like hard problems, right? And I think the problem has been that the academic institution has stifled innovation, but they've attracted the best brains. And so it's creating that idea to say it is okay to be in the punk rock is sort of what we're trying to say. Hey, it's okay to be wild. Like, it's okay to be out there, like, trying stuff. Because that's where the innovation comes from. That's, you know, like, to what Alex was talking about, like, Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, like, all these people, like, they were always, they did multiple things. They weren't one thing. Like everyone always like focuses on what one thing that like everyone in science has become these one like weapons. And it's like the people we remember were like inventors in 7 different fields and tried tons of other stuff. And so it's one of those, I think where this goes is I think people revert to free thought and freedom and trying new things. I do believe things like Prospera are going to thrive in this environment where we've had too much structure and we need to find new ways in which to release wild. And like, I think special economic zones, I think we're going to be starting to be able to have testing environments for like therapeutics within a year rather than 20 years. And I think if we my focus and what I keep saying is like, I will become my own doctor. That is where this goes. This goes towards, I am the vehicle in which I am doing my own tests. And I'm going to be able to simulate my own experiments. I'm going to be able to, whether it's digital or physical, I'm going to have a lab in my house. There's going to be a whole other room in everyone's houses that's like, hey, beep, pop, pop. You want implants? Beep, pop, pop. You want, whatever the thing is. So where does this go? I'm my own doctor. That's where this goes. Like, and
Amazing.
I think that's the same way I'm already my own banker. I'm already my own, like, we are moving in this direction of sovereign
individuals.
And
right?
that leads to the creative, like the creative winning. And like, that's always the most interesting world to live in, is where the creative things actually are built.
And Adam, what advice would you give people who are, we're going through, like, I don't know, a little crash in the DeSci space, I would say. Everyone wants number to go up. Number's not going up at the moment. What would you, like, as someone that's been in the crypto world for a long time, right? What advice would you give them around that? Number's not going up. It's dead. The whole
Jeff Bezos says stubborn on vision, flexible on details, right? Like, I would probably find where you're grounded. Like, I think the most important thing is, where's your grounding? Was your grounding in the price? If your grounding's in the price, like, you're going to get effed this entire market. Like, this is not for you, is what I would recommend. If your grounding is in just looking around at the other people who are in this market building, and you see those people and you meet those people and you realize, wait, I'm in the most impressive room that there could be. If that's your grounding, like, you will just realize where, like, you're like, oh, okay, the price went down. Like, some people speculated today, like, and it's stubborn on visual, flexible on details. Like, the vision is like, we are testing on ourselves. We are doing these things ourselves, and we all feel comfortable doing that. And the current, like, pricing is like, hey, it's a buying moment. Like, let's buy stuff. Like, this is a good time to buy things.
In the crashes. Yep.
Yeah. I bought at the high of things. I bought at the low of things. It turns out if you're on the right movement, it doesn't matter. Like, it never, like, it's.
Yeah. You mentioned it earlier, right? The crash from $30 to $3. That was terrible. You should have gotten out, but really that was the best time to buy.
Imagine having bought like $10,000 at 30 and it crashing to $2. You would have been broken, right?
Yeah.
You now have $5 in your account if you're converting it to USD, but you actually have 500 Bitcoin or whatever it is. That would, I can't do the conversion right now, but like a significant amount of Bitcoin. So if you keep thinking in terms of, and a good analogy is just saying, who am I? What brain power am I owning a small piece of? Like, where is that? Is a good way. Like, crypto market was similar, where it's just like, what ecosystem? Like, I own shares of Coinbase because I'm like, hey, that's still a great brain power ecosystem, right? I own tokens in BioDAO because Bio XYZ, because, like, that seems to be an incredible ecosystem that enables scientists. So, like, I own HairDAO because it's the best run DAO. Like, I just believe in this ecosystem of, like, rather than thinking of what the structure of it is, what the day price is, it's just like, hey, do you believe? And if you believe, like, you got to believe in something or someone, right? Like, those are the two ways in which to make money.
So, I mean, and by the way, the creativity that comes out of these DAOs is mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing. I think we're coming up to time, right? So one last thing, Alex, so where to next for you, right? For Heterodox Labs, where to next? Where are you going?
Yeah, so I think we're going to a new frontier. And so I wrote this essay recently called A New Frontier, and I started out talking about this character who's overlooking a vast, wide open frontier on top of this treacherous mountain while the cold winds are blowing against him. And he's thinking about this new frontier of science in a very concrete way. And I think that's something that I want a lot of us to start doing, which is trying to sort of envision this new frontier from the ground up, from scratch, because the Overton window has shifted. The ball is in our court. We have the ability to mold the future of science. And with the advent of blockchain and decentralized technologies, we can construct a new frontier for science, and maintain this into the future if we think about the properties of what the future should look like. And I think those three properties are radical, open, and decentralized. Radical meaning anybody can explore sort of any idea that they want, regardless of any sort of institutional incentive structure or social pressures. They can just explore radical ideas if they wish to. Open meaning open source ideally, but sort of transparent in general. The data, the models, the code, the materials that produce science are available to the masses so that folks can actually access them and contribute if they wish. And then decentralized. I think about decentralization in terms of self-sufficiency. We want a future of science that is allows scientists to be fully self-sufficient. They can create a lab if they wish. They can explore ideas in whichever direction they want to with whatever methodology suits them. And so our goal at Heterodox is to practically build new tools and infrastructure to support that. And so virtual lab platform is what we've started with. We're working on physical spaces as well, and then trying to sort of fuse all of it into a mix that helps us advance onto a new frontier and makes more progress in science.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate you both. Really excited to explore the new frontier with you both. And I'm excited to see where this journey goes with all these new quests, right, Adam, that we're about to explore.
I'm amped. New
Cool.
quests.
New quests. New quests. All right.